Imagine waking up tomorrow, turning on your tap, and nothing comes out. No drinking water, no shower, no cooking, just panic. Now imagine living like that every single day. That's exactly how almost every human lived for thousands of years. But one incredible breakthrough changed civilization forever, and almost nobody knows the full story. Imagine waking up tomorrow, you're thirsty. Not just thirsty, the kind of thirst that makes your mouth feel like sand. You leave your home carrying a clay pot, hoping today's journey will end differently than yesterday's. Because finding water isn't the hard part, finding safe water is. One wrong sip could leave you bedridden for days, or worse. For thousands of years, this wasn't an occasional inconvenience. It was simply life, and that's easy to forget today. Now, clean water appears with the twist of a tap. We rarely stop to wonder how it got there, or why it almost always arrives clear, cold, and safe. But behind that ordinary moment lies one of humanity's greatest stories, a story of brilliant engineers, desperate cities, hidden tunnels, colossal stone bridges, and discoveries that quietly saved billions of lives. The strange part? Most people know almost nothing about it, because civilization wasn't built only by kings, armies, or inventions like the wheel. It was built by something far less glamorous, a reliable drink of water. And once you understand how difficult that was to achieve, you'll never look at a glass of water the same way again. But before people learned how to bring clean water into their cities, they first had to solve a much older problem, surviving long enough to build one. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans didn't build cities, they didn't build roads, they didn't build kingdoms. Instead, they followed something far more important: water. Wherever fresh water flowed, life followed. Families settled beside rivers, animals gathered at watering holes, and forests flourished around lakes and streams. If the water disappeared, people packed up everything they owned and moved with it. In many ways, water wasn't just a resource, it was humanity's first map. But here's what makes this story fascinating. Those early rivers were doing far more than keeping people alive. They were quietly shaping the future of civilization, and that simple truth would eventually force humans to solve one of history's greatest engineering challenges. Picture yourself standing beside a river nearly 10,000 years ago. The water sparkles under the sun. Fish swim beneath the surface. Birds circle overhead. At first glance, it seems like the perfect place to live, and for a while, it was. The river offered drinking water, fish to catch, fertile soil for crops, and an easy way to travel long before roads existed. It became the center of everyday life. Children grew up on its banks. Farmers planted their fields nearby. Traders floated goods downstream on simple wooden boats. That's why some of history's earliest civilizations, including those in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and ancient China, rose beside major rivers. It wasn't a coincidence. Without dependable water, none of them could have survived. But the very thing that made rivers so valuable also made them surprisingly dangerous. A river is constantly changing. One season it can be calm and crystal clear. The next, heavy rains upstream can turn it into a muddy torrent, carrying dirt, dead plants, animal waste, and countless unseen contaminants. Early people didn't understand bacteria or viruses. They had no microscopes, no germ theory, no water testing kits. Yet generation after generation noticed an unsettling pattern. Some water made people sick. Other water didn't. They couldn't explain why, but they learned through painful experience that not every clear stream was safe, and not every muddy one was deadly. That observation became one of humanity's earliest survival lessons. Trust your senses, but never trust them completely, because what they couldn't see would become one of history's greatest invisible enemies. As villages slowly transformed into towns, a new problem emerged. The river that had once supported a few hundred people suddenly had to support thousands. Imagine everyone drawing water from the same place, washing clothes, bathing, cleaning tools, watering animals, discarding waste. The larger a settlement became, the harder it was to keep the water clean. And unlike today, there was no massive treatment plant quietly working in the background. Nature was doing all the filtering. Eventually, nature couldn't keep up. For the first time, people faced a terrifying possibility. The rivers they depended on might no longer be enough. So, instead of looking across the landscape, they began looking beneath their feet. Digging into the earth changed everything. Someone, somewhere, realized that rainwater didn't simply disappear after soaking into the ground. It collected underground, slowly moving through layers of rock, gravel, and sand. In a way, the earth was acting like a gigantic natural filter. Think of it like pouring muddy water through a thick sponge. The dirt gets trapped, while cleaner water slowly passes through. That same process happens beneath the ground over weeks, months, and sometimes years. People began digging wells to reach this hidden supply. For many communities, it was a revolutionary idea. Instead of relying entirely on rivers, they now had access to water protected beneath the surface. It wasn't perfect. Some wells dried up, others became contaminated, but overall, they offered something incredibly valuable, a second chance. And before long, one civilization would take this idea further than anyone had imagined. Long before towering castles, paved roads, or even the Roman Empire, a quiet revolution was taking place beneath the feet of ordinary people. It wasn't loud. There were no great battles or famous kings celebrating the achievement. Yet this single innovation would allow entire civilizations to survive in places that should have been almost impossible to live. The surprising part? Most people have never even heard of it. Its name was the qanat, a network of underground tunnels that may have been one of the smartest engineering ideas in human history. And once you understand how they worked, you'll wonder why they aren't considered one of the greatest inventions ever created. Imagine standing in the middle of a hot, dry valley, somewhere in ancient Persia, nearly 2,700 years ago. The landscape stretches endlessly toward distant mountains. The sun beats down relentlessly, baking the earth until it cracks. Rivers are scarce, rainfall is unpredictable, and summer heat can destroy crops within weeks. At first glance, building a town here seems impossible. Without water, nothing survives. No farms, no livestock, no families, no civilization. But ancient Persian engineers noticed something almost everyone else ignored. While the surface looked completely dry, the mountains quietly held an enormous secret. Every winter, snow accumulated on their peaks. As temperatures rose, that snow melted and slowly seeped into the ground, disappearing from sight. Most people assumed the water was simply gone. It wasn't. It was traveling underground, and if someone could find a way to reach it, they could make the desert bloom. Instead of trying to carry water across miles of scorching land in buckets or clay jars, Persian engineers came up with an astonishing solution. They would bring the water to the people, not with pumps, not with machines, but with nothing more than gravity. They began digging a gently sloping tunnel from the foothills toward villages many miles away. Every few dozen meters, workers carved vertical shafts straight down from the surface. From above, these shafts looked like a perfectly spaced line of circular holes stretching across the desert. To travelers, they seemed mysterious. To engineers, they were essential. These openings allowed fresh air to circulate, provided access for repairs, and gave workers a way to remove soil as the tunnel expanded deeper underground. The tunnel itself stayed hidden beneath the earth, protecting the precious water from the scorching sun and dramatically reducing evaporation. It was brilliantly simple and astonishingly effective, but digging these tunnels was far more dangerous than most people realize. There were no bulldozers, no drills, no lasers, no GPS. Every single meter had to be carved by hand. Workers chipped through rock with basic iron tools, often squeezing through passages barely large enough for a person to crawl. One mistake in measuring the slope could stop the entire system from working. If the tunnel dropped too steeply, rushing water could erode the walls. If it was too flat, the water would simply stop flowing. Imagine spending years digging through solid ground, only to discover your tunnel was tilted by a fraction of a degree. Everything would have to start again. Even worse, cave-ins were common. The deeper workers dug, the greater the danger became. Many never returned home, yet generation after generation continued building these incredible tunnels because they understood something vital. Water wasn't just worth working for, it was worth risking everything for. And eventually, those sacrifices transformed barren deserts into thriving communities. As soon as the first qanats reached nearby villages, life changed almost overnight. Fields that had been dry and lifeless suddenly produced wheat, barley, grapes, and fruit trees. Livestock multiplied. Markets appeared. Families settled permanently instead of constantly searching for the next reliable water source. Entire towns emerged where survival had once seemed impossible. Think of it like installing a modern city's plumbing system, except these engineers accomplished it more than 2,000 years before electricity. Perhaps even more incredible, the system required almost no fuel. Gravity did nearly all the work. Water flowed quietly day and night, without engines, pumps, or moving parts. It was sustainable centuries before the word sustainability even existed. But while Persia mastered the art of hidden water, another civilization was preparing to build something the entire world would remember. Across the Mediterranean, a growing republic faced a different problem. Rome wasn't surrounded by endless desert. It had rivers, springs, and rainfall. At first, those sources were enough. But Rome wasn't staying small. Every year, more people arrived. More homes were built. More fountains, baths, workshops, and farms demanded water. The city was growing faster than nature could comfortably support. Eventually, local springs could no longer satisfy the needs of hundreds of thousands of people. Rome faced a choice: either limit its growth or find water somewhere else. The decision its engineers made would become one of the boldest construction projects in the ancient world. And what they built would remain one of history's greatest engineering masterpieces for more than 2,000 years. Rome wasn't supposed to become the largest city on Earth, at least not by nature's design. Its hills were beautiful, its rivers were useful, and its location made it a perfect crossroads for trade. But there was one problem the Romans couldn't ignore forever. The city was simply growing too fast. Every year, thousands of new people arrived. Families built homes on every available hillside. Merchants filled crowded streets with goods from distant lands. Public baths became gathering places. Fountains flowed constantly, and construction never seemed to stop. But every new citizen brought the same unavoidable question: where would tomorrow's water come from? The local springs that had once supplied a small settlement could no longer satisfy a city approaching 1 million people. Wells were being used faster than they could naturally refill. Rivers became increasingly crowded with boats, animals, and human activity. For the first time, Rome faced a crisis that no army could solve. Without more fresh water, the empire's greatest city would eventually stop growing. And that's when Roman engineers proposed an idea so ambitious that many probably believed it was impossible. Instead of bringing people closer to water, they would bring water across entire landscapes, not for a few hundred meters, not even for a few miles, but sometimes for over 50, 60, even 80 miles. Imagine looking toward distant mountains and deciding that every single day, water from those peaks should arrive in the middle of your city without anyone carrying a single bucket. Today, we'd use electric pumps, massive pipelines, computer-controlled pressure systems. The Romans had none of those. Instead, they trusted something that never stopped working: gravity. It sounds simple: pour water downhill and it flows. But keeping that water flowing smoothly across valleys, forests, rivers, and rocky hills without losing speed or flooding the entire system was one of the hardest engineering problems anyone had attempted. The entire journey depended on an almost invisible slope. Too steep, and the water would rush with enough force to destroy the channels. Too flat, and it would stop moving altogether. Across dozens of miles, engineers had to maintain an almost perfectly consistent downward gradient. Even a tiny mistake could ruin years of construction, and somehow they managed to do it. This is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. When people picture Roman aqueducts, they usually imagine enormous stone bridges stretching gracefully across valleys. Those iconic arches have appeared in movies, textbooks, and travel photos for generations. But here's something most people never realize. Those towering bridges were actually the exception, not the rule. Most Roman aqueducts were hidden underground. Whenever engineers could, they carved channels beneath the surface, protecting the water from contamination, harsh weather, and enemy attacks. The famous arches only appeared when nature forced their hand. If a deep valley blocked the route, they couldn't simply stop. They built across it, stone by stone, arch by arch. Some of these structures rose higher than modern apartment buildings, and they were constructed without cranes, steel beams, or powered machinery. Everything depended on careful planning, skilled craftsmen, and an extraordinary understanding of physics. Perhaps the most astonishing part? Many of these structures are still standing after nearly 2,000 years. Think about that. Some modern buildings struggle to survive a century without major repairs, yet Roman aqueducts continue to dominate landscapes across Europe. But the arches were only the beginning of their engineering genius. Once the water finally reached Rome, another challenge appeared. How do you distribute enough water for an entire city? Today, we'd simply connect homes to underground pipes. Ancient Rome had to invent its own solution. The incoming water first entered enormous distribution tanks. From there, it was carefully directed toward different parts of the city. Public fountains received a steady supply. Bathhouses, famous throughout the empire, required thousands of gallons every single day. Government buildings had priority. Some wealthy homes even received private connections. Imagine walking through Rome nearly 2,000 years ago. Instead of searching for a well, you'd hear the constant sound of flowing water echoing through public squares. Fresh water poured from decorative fountains day and night. For many visitors from other parts of the ancient world, it must have seemed almost magical. A city where water never appeared to stop. It wasn't magic, it was infrastructure. And infrastructure quietly changed everything. Because once people no longer spent hours every day collecting water, they suddenly had time to build something much bigger. Reliable water transformed Rome in ways that had nothing to do with drinking. Farmers could produce more food, markets became larger, craftsmen opened workshops, public baths improved hygiene, and became centers of social life. Construction accelerated, trade expanded. The city grew richer because people could focus on creating, inventing, and building instead of simply surviving. Think of clean water like electricity today. Most of us rarely think about it until it disappears. But remove it for just a few days, and modern life begins falling apart. The same was true in ancient Rome. Water wasn't merely supporting civilization, it had become the invisible foundation beneath it. And that's why historians often say the Roman aqueducts weren't just engineering marvels, they were economic engines. They helped make one of history's largest cities possible. But hidden beneath this incredible achievement was a dangerous problem that the Romans couldn't see because it was completely invisible. The water looked clean. It tasted fresh. The fountains flowed endlessly. Everything appeared perfect. Yet nobody understood that perfectly clear water could still carry deadly microscopic organisms. The Romans had no idea bacteria existed. No one had discovered viruses. Microscopes were still more than 1,000 years away. If someone became sick after drinking water, the cause remained a mystery. Some blamed bad air, others blamed angry gods. Many believed illness simply appeared without warning. Ironically, despite creating one of history's greatest water systems, the Romans still couldn't fully protect themselves from the greatest danger hiding inside it, because the enemy wasn't dirt, it wasn't mud, it wasn't even bad smells. It was something no human being had ever seen. And after the Roman Empire began to crumble, humanity would lose far more than its greatest engineering achievement. It would lose centuries of knowledge. Imagine living in Rome at the height of its power. Fresh water pours from public fountains. Massive bathhouses welcome thousands of visitors every day. Aqueducts stretch across valleys like giant stone highways in the sky, silently delivering millions of gallons of water from distant mountains. The system seems unstoppable, a masterpiece of engineering so advanced that people assume it will last forever. But history has a habit of proving one thing: nothing lasts forever, not even the greatest empire the world had ever seen. And when Rome began to collapse, it didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, almost quietly, until one day people realized that the systems they depended on were beginning to fail. The roads weren't maintained, the bridges cracked, the government weakened, and the aqueducts, the lifelines of entire cities, were no longer being repaired with the same care and precision. At first, the changes were barely noticeable. Then the water started flowing more slowly. Eventually, some channels stopped flowing altogether. For people who had grown accustomed to endless fresh water, it must have felt like watching civilization itself dry up. But losing the aqueducts wasn't even the biggest problem that followed. Without a reliable water network, communities had no choice but to return to something much older: wells, streams, small rivers, natural springs. Suddenly, collecting water became part of everyday life again. Imagine waking up before sunrise, not because you had work to do, but because you needed to secure enough water before everyone else reached the village well. Children carried wooden buckets instead of books. Women often spent hours each day walking back and forth between their homes and the nearest water source. Farmers planned their entire schedule around where water could be found. In many places, life became smaller. Villages grew around springs instead of engineered pipelines. Towns depended on nearby rivers rather than distant mountain reservoirs. It wasn't that people forgot how valuable water was. If anything, they appreciated it even more. But without large governments capable of organizing enormous construction projects, maintaining sophisticated water systems became nearly impossible. Building an aqueduct was difficult. Maintaining one for centuries required an entire civilization working together, and when that civilization disappeared, so did much of its infrastructure. But here's where one of history's biggest myths begins. If you've ever watched a movie about the Middle Ages, you've probably seen dark streets, filthy cities, and people supposedly refusing to drink water because it was too dangerous. According to one of the internet's most popular stories, everyone survived by drinking beer, ale, or wine all day long. It sounds believable. It's repeated everywhere. There's just one problem. It's mostly wrong. Yes, medieval people drank ale. Yes, they drank wine, but they also drank plenty of water. Think about it for a moment. Water is free. Beer takes time to brew. Wine requires vineyards. Ale needs grain, labor, and fuel. Would poor farming families really have enough alcohol to replace every single glass of water they needed every day? Probably not. Historical records tell a very different story. Travelers praised clear mountain springs. Monasteries built wells. Kings ordered drinking cups to be placed beside clean roadside springs for exhausted travelers. Even medieval physicians wrote instructions explaining how to recognize good drinking water. They advised people to choose water that looked clear, smelled fresh, and flowed continuously rather than standing still. No, they didn't understand microbes, but they understood observation. If certain water repeatedly made people sick, they learned to avoid it. Experience became their teacher, and sometimes that experience led to surprisingly clever solutions. One of the simplest methods involved doing almost nothing. Instead of drawing water directly from muddy rivers, people often collected it from springs emerging naturally from underground. Why? Because the earth had already filtered it. Think of layers of sand, gravel, and stone as nature's own water treatment system. As rainwater slowly traveled underground, many impurities became trapped long before the water reached the surface again. Centuries before modern science explained filtration, people had already noticed something remarkable. Spring water usually tasted better, it smelled cleaner, and more importantly, people who drank it often stayed healthier. No laboratory was needed to notice that pattern. Observation alone shaped generations of practical knowledge. Most people don't realize that this kind of everyday wisdom formed the foundation of public health long before scientists understood why it worked. Sometimes survival comes first. The explanation comes centuries later, but even the cleanest spring couldn't solve a growing city's biggest challenge. As medieval towns slowly expanded, familiar problems returned. More people meant more waste, more animals, more workshops, more butchers, more tanneries, and unfortunately, more pollution. Pictures a small stream flowing through a busy town. Upstream, families collect drinking water. Farther downstream, cloth makers wash fabrics. Nearby, leather workers soak animal hides using chemicals. Even farther along, butchers clean carcasses after slaughter. Everyone depends on the same river. Everyone changes it. Without careful planning, yesterday's clean water quickly became tomorrow's health problem. This wasn't because medieval people were careless. In fact, many towns created surprisingly strict rules. Certain industries were ordered to operate downstream. Waste disposal was regulated. Communities protected important wells with walls and roofs. Some cities even fined people for contaminating public water supplies. Why? Because everyone understood one simple truth: clean water wasn't a luxury. it was survival. And before long, another technological revolution would quietly transform drinking water once again, not by moving it farther, but by making it safer than ever before. For thousands of years, people judged water using their eyes, noses, and experience. If it looked clean, it was probably safe. If it smelled bad, stay away. Most of the time, those rules worked surprisingly well, but not always. Sometimes crystal clear water carried invisible dangers. Sometimes perfectly healthy-looking rivers spread deadly diseases without anyone understanding why. Humanity had solved the problem of moving water. It had learned where to find cleaner sources. It had even created rules to protect them. Yet one enormous mystery remained unsolved. Why did some people fall horribly ill after drinking water that looked absolutely perfect? The answer would remain hidden until scientists discovered an entire invisible world living inside every drop. And that discovery would completely rewrite everything humanity thought it knew about drinking water. Because the next chapter isn't about engineers anymore. It's about the invisible enemies they never knew existed. Every generation believes its greatest challenge is unique. The Romans thought it was transporting water across mountains. Medieval towns struggled to protect their wells from pollution. The Industrial Revolution fought invisible diseases hiding inside rivers. But today, humanity faces a challenge unlike any before. For the first time in history, it isn't just about making water clean. It's about making sure there's enough of it for everyone. And that's becoming harder every single year. Because while Earth looks like a blue planet from space, almost none of that water is actually available for us to drink. Imagine holding a 1-liter bottle filled completely with water. Now imagine that bottle represents every drop of water on Earth. Oceans, rivers, lakes, glaciers, underground reservoirs, everything. It seems like an endless supply. But here's the reality. Almost 97% of that bottle would be salt water from the oceans. You can't drink it without removing the salt first. That leaves only about 3% as fresh water. Sounds better. Except most of that fresh water is locked away in glaciers, ice caps, or buried deep underground where it's incredibly difficult to reach. The amount that's actually available in rivers, lakes, wetlands, and shallow groundwater, the water humans depend on every day, is only a tiny fraction of the whole bottle. Think about that. Everything we've built, every farm, every city, every factory, every glass of water you've ever drunk depends on an astonishingly small portion of Earth's water. And yet, we often act as if it's unlimited. But nature has a way of reminding us when we take something precious for granted. Across the world, rivers that once seemed endless are shrinking. Some no longer reach the sea for parts of the year. Ancient lakes that supported civilizations for centuries have dramatically receded. Groundwater aquifers, hidden underground reservoirs that took thousands of years to fill, are being pumped faster than rain can replace them. Imagine spending your entire life saving money in a bank account, then suddenly withdrawing more every month than you ever deposit. Eventually, no matter how large that account once was, it runs dry. That's exactly what's happening in many parts of the world. Groundwater isn't an infinite resource. It's a savings account created by nature over thousands of years. Once it's gone, replacing it isn't something that happens next season. Sometimes it takes centuries, and that's forcing engineers to rethink almost everything they know about water. One of the biggest ideas today sounds almost impossible. What if we could drink seawater? After all, the oceans contain almost all of Earth's water. If we could remove the salt efficiently, water shortages might become a thing of the past. This process is called desalination. Modern desalination plants push seawater through incredibly thin membranes filled with microscopic pores. Imagine trying to push basketballs and grains of sand through the same tiny screen. The water molecules squeeze through, the salt stays behind. It's an astonishing piece of engineering. Cities in dry coastal regions now depend on desalination plants every single day. But there's a catch. Removing salt requires enormous amounts of energy. That makes desalinated water far more expensive than water collected from rivers or reservoirs. Scientists continue searching for cheaper, faster, and more sustainable ways to do it. Because if they succeed, they could completely reshape humanity's relationship with water. But even the smartest technology can't solve another growing problem. The cleanest water in the world is useless if it's wasted. Think about your own home. A dripping faucet, an unnecessary long shower, a garden sprinkler running in the middle of a rainstorm. Individually, those seem insignificant. Collectively, multiplied across millions of homes, the numbers become staggering. Agriculture faces an even bigger challenge. Growing food requires enormous amounts of water. Some crops consume far more than others. Modern farmers now use sensors buried underground that measure soil moisture in real time. Instead of watering entire fields on a schedule, computers tell irrigation systems exactly when plants actually need water. Drones fly overhead scanning crops. Satellites monitor drought conditions from space. Artificial intelligence predicts rainfall weeks in advance. It's remarkable to think about. Thousands of years ago, people searched the sky for signs of rain. Today, computers search the clouds for us. And this technological revolution is happening much faster than most people realize. Perhaps the most surprising lesson in this entire story is this: the history of drinking water has never really been about water. It's been about people. Every generation inherited a problem it didn't create. Ancient Persians inherited deserts. Romans inherited growing cities. Scientists inherited deadly diseases they couldn't even see. Modern engineers have inherited a warming planet and billions of people who all need clean water every single day. Each generation found a new solution, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Water has quietly connected every civilization in history. Empires have risen because of it. Wars have been fought over it. Entire cities exist only because someone solved the problem of bringing fresh water to them. And despite all our modern technology, that hasn't changed. Not even a little. Which brings us to one final realization, one that's hiding in plain sight every single day. Tomorrow morning, you'll probably wake up, walk into your kitchen, turn a handle, and watch clean water pour effortlessly into a glass. You'll barely think about it. Most of us don't. Yet behind that simple moment lies more than 5,000 years of human ingenuity. Thousands of anonymous workers digging underground tunnels by hand. Roman engineers measuring impossible slopes across mountains. Scientists staring through microscopes at worlds nobody knew existed. Doctors risking their reputations to prove disease spread through contaminated water. Engineers building treatment plants that quietly protect millions of people every single day. Every sip connects you to that story. A story of survival, curiosity, failure, discovery, in one simple truth: civilizations weren't built because humans conquered nature. They were built because humans learned to work with it. The next time you pour yourself a glass of water, take a second to appreciate it, because the greatest inventions in history aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones flowing silently through a pipe beneath your feet.